17. And in Matthew 5:17, the Lord says, "Don't think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or one stroke of a letter will pass away from the law until all things are accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commands and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not get into heaven." So in this passage, the Lord establishes an important principle that is especially important for himself and his ministry, his time on earth. He, as we know, is going to bring in...
Well, you got our attention now.
See, I had to make sure y'all were awake, losing an hour of sleep last night. It reminds me one time, if you'll forgive me the anecdote, we were driving along on a trip. We, in our wisdom, decided to drive through the night so Noah would sleep, which was, of course, foolish because he doesn't sleep. And I, however, do sleep. And driving along on the interstate and getting, heavy-lidded, hit the rumble strips. Desiree was asleep in the back seat with Noah. She sits up straight. She says, "Are you falling asleep?" I said, "Not anymore." I kept on driving, hit some coffee along the way. Point being, everyone is now awake. All right, so as we know, Jesus is going to bring an end to the law of Moses, but he's not going to overthrow the law of Moses. Here in Matthew 5:17, he says, "I did not come to abolish the law or the prophets," but Paul, in the book of Ephesians chapter 2, will speak on this subject in a similar but slightly different way. In Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 13, he says, "Now in Christ Jesus, you who were far away have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For he is our peace, who made both groups into one and tore down the dividing wall of hostility, the dividing wall of hostility. In his flesh, he made of no effect the law consisting of commands and expressed in regulations, so that he might create in himself one new man from the two, resulting in peace." Now, what is brought to an end here is the law contained in ordinances and commandments. He did this so that he might reconcile both to God in one body through the cross, by which he put to death the hostility on the cross. So the law is brought to an end in the cross. So was Jesus wrong here? Was he incorrect in what he says in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 17? It's important to note that there are two different words that are being used in Matthew 5:17 and in Ephesians chapter 2. Jesus did not overthrow the law of Moses, but he brought the law of Moses to an end. I suppose an appropriate analogy would be thinking about someone's employment. If someone is employed at a business and they're habitually late, they're caught taking money on the side, then the boss is going to come in and they're going to get what? Fired, right? Now, someone else, they've been a model employee at this business for 40 years. And at the end of the 40 years, they decide that their time for working is finished and they're going to retire. Now, The result is the same in both instances in the sense that their employment reaches its end. But those two are significantly different one from the other. To be fired is very different from being retired. In Ephesians chapter 2, Jesus retired the law of Moses. He brought the law of Moses to its fulfillment. He brought it to its completion. What he says in Matthew 5:17 is that he didn't come to fire the law of Moses. He didn't come to overthrow the law of Moses. Jesus, and even though the result, the law of Moses reaching its end, is the same in both places, they're significantly different one from the other, because this is not a hostile takeover, the new covenant taking over the old covenant. This was always the plan for the old covenant. It was always meant to give way to the new. But it also means that Jesus is always keeping the law of Moses. There are several points of interest that we'll see through our study of the book of Matthew where this is going to be important, especially where he declares that he is the Lord of the Sabbath. And we'll talk about that more then. But there are several times when people think that Jesus is violating the law of Moses and is justified for violating the law of Moses. But he's saying this perhaps by way of introduction to what he's going to say. We talked some last week about how Jesus is speaking in a way that is very different from what the Jews expected. He's introducing an idea that he's going to bring out more fully in Matthew chapter 6 by saying that the peacemakers will be called sons of God, that previous to this, God was referred to as the Father of Israel as a whole, but the idea of individuals being sons of God was not thought of in that way, and Jesus is introducing that idea. But he is about to offer some criticisms. You have heard, but I say to you. He's not contradicting the law of Moses in the things that he says. And that's an important note to take away. And that's what Jesus is introducing here, that he has not come to overthrow the law of Moses. And that's certainly an accusation that is going to be brought against him. That's not what he has come to do. But instead, he is teaching a better version of the teaching that they've been receiving, which is why he says in verse 20 that your righteousness must surpass that of the scribes and the Pharisees. The scribes and Pharisees had presented themselves as being purveyors of righteousness. He'll criticize them that they made their phylacteries broad. He often uses the Pharisees as a point of contrast between what is perceived as righteousness and what true righteousness is. And the Pharisees lived a very superficial righteousness. He'll say that they tithe cumin, mint, and dill, but ignore the weightier provisions of the law. So when he says to his disciples that they must be more righteous than the scribes and Pharisees, this is some related to that paradoxical way of teaching that Jesus employs, where they think one way, but he is teaching them another. They think that the scribes and Pharisees are the peak of righteousness. But in reality, their righteousness is very superficial. And Jesus says that they don't need to be practicing superficial righteousness, but they need to be practicing deep-seated righteousness, which he teaches on beginning here in verse 21. You have heard it was said to our ancestors, do not murder, and whoever murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you, everyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. So in these that follow, he's not violating the law of Moses. He's teaching what the law of Moses always meant, that to do not murder was more than just the superficial command not to take the life of another. All right. Any questions, comments, anything anyone has before we pick back up there in Matthew 5:21? All right. So again, you have heard it said that our ancestors were told, do not murder. This coming from Exodus chapter 20. And whoever murders will be subject to judgment. This second part is not a direct citation from the law of Moses and seems instead to be practical law, that they've taken the do not murder and they've put it into practice. Whoever murders will be subject to judgment. It's important we remember that the law of Moses was the religious law as well as the governmental law of the children of Israel. Israel practiced a theocracy where the right to rule and govern is rooted in religion as well. So the moral law, the religious law, do not murder, is given the practical mandate in government law as well. Whoever murders will be subject to judgment. Now again, Jesus does not contradict this. He takes it further. From beyond the superficial command not to take your brother's life, he says that the condition of the heart matters as well. I tell you, everyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be subject to the court. Whoever says, you fool, will be subject to hellfire. So the people, when they hear judgment, do not murder, whoever murders is subject to judgment. This is, as I said, practical law. They're thinking of the judgment of the court. And he bridges that gap from the court to the judgment of God, that whoever is angry will be subject to judgment, using the same expression as in verse 21. Whoever insults will be subject to the court, being more explicit in subject to judgment. And whoever says raka, or you fool, will be subject to hellfire. Here, not the judgment of court, but the judgment of God. So even though they were using these commands to settle matters of civil court, Jesus is reminding them that there are eternal implications to this as well. And it goes far beyond just taking the life of another person. So in this way, Jesus is not adding to, is not taking away from the law of Moses. He is offering the same instruction of the law of Moses. What is being built on is the application of that by the powers that be, that they're not going far enough. This is straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. Verse 23, he continues, so if you are offering your gift on the altar, and there you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled with your brother, and then come and offer your gift. On whom is the impetus placed here to seek resolution? The offender or the victim? In this case, the victim, right? If you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift, go and be reconciled, and then come and offer your gift. Whenever there is conflict, who needs to be seeking resolution? It's not offender or victim. Everyone, both parties, everyone involved needs to be seeking resolution. Because to harbor those hurt feelings, ill will is what leads to the insults, the hatred in the heart, which Jesus says is subject to hellfire. He says, reach a settlement quickly with your adversary while you're on the way with him to the court, or your adversary will hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the officer, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out of there until you have paid the last penny. So there is practical teaching here along with the spiritual instruction that Jesus offers. So he's primarily concerned with the spiritual matter, that if you have a gift at the altar, leave it and be reconciled with your brother first. If you're on the way to court, reach a settlement quickly, rather than leaving it up to the judge of the court. Now, in the first case, what does this tell us about our relationships with our brethren and our ability to worship God? Are they related at all? Yes, right? If we have an issue with our brother, then that creates a barrier with God. I think this is very much related to James speaking of the tongue, saying that with it we bless God and curse men made in the image of God, that it simply cannot be this way. All right. Any questions or comments anyone has before we move on to verse 27? Rick?
It's in verse 22 where it says, I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother should be guilty before the court. I'm thinking of my 50 years of being a Christian. I've been angry a couple of times. Maybe a couple of thousand, maybe even with my brother, but it's like it's here. It's an emotion you can't really stop sometimes. You can let it go too far, but the word from the Greek, maybe you know, is that regular angry?
Orge, yeah, just anger, yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
But it's hard not to be angry sometimes. There is righteous anger, but it's hard not to be angry. You can't just make yourself, I'm not going to be angry at anything, but you have to be passionless.
Right. Well, this is where, and by the way, we'll be seeing Matthew 5:21 here in a little bit as well, if you've looked ahead in the bulletin. But for one, it's important to note the context that we're talking about anger here, right? That this is clearly seated in the context of being a part of some kind of a dispute. Jesus, of course, is angry at various points. Simply being angry, being affected by the emotion of anger, is not in and of itself immoral, but the context matters here, of where the anger is coming from, what it's associated with. But this is why the condition of the heart is important, and that's the whole point of Matthew 5:21 and following, is that Jesus is here speaking on conditioning the heart and conditioning the mind and the direction of the heart and the mind. If your mind is in the right place, if your heart is in the right place, that deals with a lot of anger before it ever appears. And that's, in Galatians chapter 5, Paul speaks of outbursts of anger as being one of the deeds of the flesh, where we let the passions of the flesh overwhelm the intent of our mind and heart. Tim?
Well, I was saying it says anger without cause. Whoever's angry without cause, it says. In the King James Version, it says, "But I say to you, whoever is angry with his brother without cause shall be in danger of judgment."
That changes things.
Yeah. Well, that may have been supplied for clarity, just in the same vein of what I was saying. Is it italicized?
It's in the New Text omits without cause.
Newer texts omit.
In New Text, yeah.
Oh, in you text. Okay. Yeah. So,
Ephesians 4 says to be angry.
and yeah. Be angry and do not sin. Don't let the sun go down on your anger, right? And that's what I was saying, is that simply to lose oneself in anger, as opposed to simply being in possession of the emotion of anger. Right? The anger of men doesn't work the righteousness of God.
Inward anger, just as bad as out.
Oh yeah, and that's the points of comparison that Jesus is drawing to murder here, right? To be angry, to insult, to say "Raka, you fool," to offer a curse. That they're each equivocated with each other. That's right. All right. Any other questions, comments? Anything anyone has? All right. So I think what Jesus says here in Matthew 5:27 is even more helpful in understanding what the point is. And I say that because of the way that this is often taught, the way that it is often interpreted. And it is often done so to circumvent exactly what Jesus is saying. So you have heard that it was said, "Do not commit adultery." But I tell you, everyone who looks at a woman lustfully, everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now, when I say the way that this is often taught, the King James Version renders this something to the effect of whoever looks at a woman to lust. And so it's been said before, oh, well, if you look at a woman and lust, that's just your natural reaction. But Jesus says whoever looks at a woman in order to lust. But that really ignores what the "to" is there for, even in the translation. You'll notice that the Christian Standard Bible renders it as everyone who looks at a woman lustfully. That is, whoever looks at a woman with lust. That's where "to" comes in the King James Version. It is not expressing purpose, but rather extent. Whoever looks at a woman to the point of lusting has committed adultery with her in his heart. So it is the presence of lust, not the purpose of lust, that Jesus is speaking of here. Now, the suggestion that, oh, well, that's just your natural response, it's okay, is very much the same kind of argument as "I was born this way." That if it's a natural reaction, that it's okay. Which is not what our mindset and heart set as Christians needs to be. This is something that a person must prepare themselves to condition mind and heart so that they are in a state of holiness, if you will. That lust does not determine your actions, but that you control lustfulness. This is the reason why Jesus says what he does in verse 29, that it is controlling oneself. If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. So once again, he shows here that this is a matter of eternal consequence. Now, of course, Jesus is using hyperbole here. He uses hyperbole elsewhere in the Sermon on the Mount, i.e. log in his eye. He is not instructing people here to gouge their eyes out, lest we have blind people with no hands, no feet, all manner of body parts being cast off. This is to say that, to demonstrate the lengths to which one must go. That if you are unable to control yourself, that this is the type of preparation that you need to put into place. So to look and lust is just as much of a problem as looking in order to lust. The idea of looking and cheating is completely foreign to the New Testament. Looking is cheating, is the explicit instruction of Jesus here in Matthew chapter 5. He continues along with the eye. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away, for it is better that you lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. All right? Any questions, comments? Anything anyone has?
Well, some of I hear with that is it takes dedication to put yourself in that kind
Dedication.
of chastity and that kind of good moral stand. It takes dedication, it takes time. As if you pluck your own eye, cut your hand off, you don't really literally have to do that. But it takes time, it takes effort.
Mm-hmm.
And no one, you have your mind focused on things positive and carefully and not on things that are frivolous and sinful.
Mm-hmm. And
There's enough positivity and there's enough goodness to focus your mind on. You
Yep.
don't have to focus your mind on sinful.
set your mind on things above, right? And along with that is the reminder that another person is not responsible for your chastity, right? That I heard someone say, I feel sorry for young boys, the way that girls dress these days. The responsibility to practice chastity and the responsibility to be modest, even if related, are still individual responsibilities. Another person's immodesty does not justify lustfulness on the part of another person. All right? Any other questions, comments? Anything anyone has?
He's talking about adultery. I've heard this before, I don't know, but he's talking about, of course, adultery. But in lusting, you may not have the opportunity to commit adultery, right? But if you did have the opportunity, would you take it? That's where it becomes that lustful thing that, hey, I would take it if I were given the opportunity. I'm just as guilty as if I did it, because I would take that opportunity were it given. So you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, the difficulty there, I think, is lots of people are going to be angry with their brother, but not take an opportunity they might have to kill them, If it's only about the possibility of action, then it kind of undermines the condition of the heart, right? That,
Condition of your heart.
what's that?
I think it defines the condition of your heart, because you know whether you would do it or not. God knows whether you would do it or not. He knows your heart.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it defines the condition of your heart, rather than undermines it.
Right. Well, what I mean is, like with what he says previously about hating your brother being the equivalent of murder, is that you can hate your brother without ever having the desire to kill him, to literally put him to death. And someone can have a lustful desire for another person without ever intending on following through on that. I mean, that's the reason why pornography generates billions of dollars of income every year. There are a lot of people that lust after those images online that being in the room with another person wouldn't actually have adulterous intercourse with them, but they allow those desires of the flesh to run rampant in mind and heart. I think that's more the point of what Jesus is saying here about adultery in Matthew 5.
It could be, that's just something I've heard before.
Yeah.
And it seemed like makes sense.
All right. Any other questions or comments?
Everything Timothy just mentioned there, anything we've talked about this morning, it's sin.
Yeah.
And it's just as bad as sin to have it in or to do it out.
Mm-hmm.
When you have it out, what you really do it.
And that's the reason why grace is vital, right? Rick said, I've been guilty of being angry with my brother a dozen or a few thousand times. I've made light of offering people driving instruction on the road. You're supposed to use your turn signal and whatnot. And the inevitability of sin is not a justification for it, which is why we depend on grace. Reading very core principles like this, laid out simply, should make us feel uncomfortable, because we should be able to see not all of these things, many of these things in our own lives. And that's, the word highlighting where we have to be aware of ourselves. All right. Any other questions, comments? Anything anyone has?
Thinking of that adultery as a sin and having it in your own heart, it's so much easier to commit that type of sin than it is to murder somebody.
Like I was saying with internet pornography, the opportunity for people to be able to take part in that type of behavior with little to no consequence outside of their own lives.
Immediate.
Yeah. Very appropriate word to add there, with no immediate consequence. No accountability to another person is, it is unique now from at least to the extent that it is to any time in the past. It's something that every person, man or woman, has to be mindful of. All right. Verse 31, Jesus says, "It was also said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a written notice of divorce. But I tell you, everyone who divorces his wife, except in a case of sexual immorality, causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery." Now, this is a much briefer teaching than what Jesus offers elsewhere when questioned in Matthew chapter 19. And he takes marriage there back beyond the law of Moses, going all the way back to creation. But this written certificate, this written notice of divorce that he makes reference to himself here in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 31, coming from Deuteronomy chapter 24, is something that his opponents make reference to in Matthew chapter 19 as well. Jesus acknowledges that there is a legitimate justification for divorce. And rather than contradicting the law of Moses, as we've seen, he teaches the law of Moses more accurately. In Matthew 19, the question is asked, can a man divorce his wife for any reason at all? And Jesus says he can divorce his wife, but not for any reason at all, is the short version of it. And we see just how common this was in the fact that his disciples say, oh, well, if what you said is true, it's better not to get married. And we'll talk about that more a few weeks from now, of course. But this is the reason why a divorced woman is forced to commit adultery. When he says everyone who divorces his wife causes her to commit adultery, it's not because for a woman to be divorced is inherently adultery. The nature of practical necessity were remarried, that they were divorced for one of these any reason divorces, the any reason clause, that they could be divorced, remarried because of the inability of women to live independently, to own property, to work in marketplaces, that they were remarried to survive. The teaching was so common, there was seemed to be no problem with it. But Jesus is here taking the law of Moses a step further, saying that it's not just that you can give her a written notice of divorce because she burned the beans or offended you in one way or another, but because of sexual immorality specifically. But he puts responsibility not just on the woman that is remarried, but on the husband that divorces her unjustly, and also the husband that takes another person's spouse as his own. We'll talk a lot more about that and refer back to Matthew chapter 5 when we get to Matthew 19, just because it's so much more intricate what we read in Matthew 19, composing several verses instead of just two. All right. Any questions or comments? Anything that anyone has in closing? All right. Well, if not, then we'll pick up in chapter 5 and verse 33 next week.